South East Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.
John Lonergan is best known as the former governor of Mountjoy prison, a role which he held for over 30 years. But can the skills of managing a prison be applied to a business scenario? John, you first entered the prison service back in 1968, but what appealed to you about working in this particular area? And did you hold any preconceptions about prison life at the time?
Indeed, I did. First of all, I had no particular insights at all into prison, and I just saw a job being advertised in the prison service and in the newspapers, national newspapers, and by the Civil Service Commission at the time. 50 years ago, by the way, this month, on the 8th of March, just the perception and beliefs I had was that all the bad people in the world and in Ireland at the time would be in prison, and all the good people would be outside. And so that innocent, and I wasn't there a week when I began to realise, well, that's certainly not the case, because I almost instantly I observed that there were quite a number of what I would call nowadays social misfits and social rejects, and people with physical disabilities and mental disabilities, things that weren't recognised even 50 years ago. Mostly poor people, poorly educated people with a lot of mental illness, addiction problems, particularly alcohol at the time, and wine, old cheap wine. And then the odd, I suppose, serious criminal mixed up amongst them. I've said in the past, like, that it reminded me more at the time of the old local county homes that were in existence almost in every county at that time, where I suppose unfortunate and misfortunate people ended up towards the end of their lives. So prison was not, the reality of prison was not what I expected it to be.
And John, how dangerous a job was it?
It wasn't dangerous at all as such. The perception is, of course, that a prison is a very dangerous place, and because there's quite a high number of people who have violent records incarcerated in or held in prisons. But the reality is that prisons operate very smoothly, and the principle really that prisoners cooperate and get on, and the main objective of nearly every prisoner is to get out. The sooner he or she gets out, the better for them, and they work on that basis. So prisoners are like big colleges and big institutions, boarding schools. They operate to a timetable, they operate to a regime that's almost self-managing. And so prisoners, they cooperate 99% of the time.
So, John, provide us with an insight into the role of a governor within Mountjoy.
Governor is a manager. He gets the name, or he or she, the title governor, but that's a legal title, because a prisoner, a citizen who is sentenced by the court and committed to prison is committed into the care of the governor. And that's a legal term. But other than that, in terms of the day-to-day management of a prison, the governor is a manager, the same as any manager on the outside, responsible for the overall safety and well-being of everybody working and committed to prison, security, safety, financial controls, and all that goes with that, and running the place in accordance with the law, because you are actually responsible to the courts for the execution of the warrants, so you're answerable to them for making sure that the prisoner is safe and is held in custody, and then you're answerable to the minister in relation to finance and all that sort of stuff. But in terms of the job itself, the day-to-day job is all about managing the resources that you have been allocated by government.
What was a typical day in your life as governor of Mountjoy?
A typical day would be you start around 8:30, 8:45 in the morning, meet the staff, senior staff. We had a little staff meeting, the same as many organisations would have every morning, just to reflect on the day ahead and maybe to reflect on the night before, what happened, to inform ourselves. And then we'd have what we call Governor's Parade, where all the senior people in the prison, the governor included, would go into the prison itself and have what's called Governor's Parade, which is the prisoners could put their names down to be seen by the governor to make requests, whatever. Sometimes they'd be requesting to appeal a sentence, to looking for a transfer to another prison, an extra family visit, and then after that, as the governor, you'd tour the prison to look at it, just to inspect it and see that everything is okay. And then after that, you'd have meetings around which, we had a lot of it was a multidisciplinary organisation that you had teachers, chaplains, nurses, doctors, psychiatrists, all sorts of different professionals all working in the prison. And so working and coordinating that was part of the job as well. And then, of course, dealing with discipline, because there'd be problems with prisoners and often with staff, assessing staff for in terms of their probation service, people on probation, lots of stuff like that, meeting families of prisoners sometimes, especially, I suppose, Mountjoy was a very busy place and quite unpredictable and sometimes quite exciting, because that was the nature of it.
And John, how would you describe your own management style?
Well, I suppose when I started off, I was appointed governor of Mountjoy in 1984, and at that time I was relatively young, 36, which was very young for someone to be appointed as the governor of Mountjoy. And I suppose it gave me, though, the freedom maybe and the openness to maybe to tackle it in a different way. But I believe very much in a consultative type of management, and a delegated type of management, which was unknown, by the way. I'm not saying this for any boasting reasons now, but and delegation was unknown in prisons at the time, and I felt that was one of the things you have to do, is to delegate to other people and to allow people to have to do their own thing within reason. So that style, I also was pretty open, I think, and approachable in relation to prisoners and all that sort of thing, that prisoners could come in and talk freely. And I wasn't, I didn't adhere to the old days, the governor was a very autocratic dictator, and very few people ever got close to him. There was always men in those days. So I suppose I changed that style on the basis that I believed that openness was very important.
And in terms of applying your management experience to a business context, what are, in your opinion, the key principles of management which can be implemented irrespective of the environment?
Yeah, I would argue that it doesn't really matter what organisation you're running, but the principles and the philosophy would be very much the same, in my opinion. And I often say that to principals in secondary schools or primary schools or in hospitals or in organisations. It doesn't matter. The principles are that you show respect, first of all, to all the people that you have working for you and that you have under your care. I would say that for me, that was a huge part of the philosophy, was to show respect. I believe very strongly if you show respect and respect people, that you'll get it back in bucketfuls. So that would be my first. So always treating people with respect, always being honest and fair to people, and be doing your best to find people doing their best rather than the other way around. To be constantly, I suppose, looking for the negative. That most staff and most people, in my case in custody, want to do well, and so it's about that. It's about recognising people. A lot of the simple things are the most effective things. Recognising people, thanking people, appreciating people, giving encouragement and praise to people, being very fair to people as well, in the sense that you have no favourites. I always say that you should have no white-haired boys or white-haired girls on your team. You must treat everybody the same in terms of if somebody is particularly good as a member of staff, well, then you reward them by either through pay or through promotion or whatever the avenues that are available to you. But you don't have favourites, and you don't... I used to always say as well, never involve, as a boss or as the manager or as the person in charge, never involve yourself in gossip, because again, if you involve yourself in gossip, you'll be undermining the authority of the office and the fairness of it and the impartiality of it, because you have to be impartial. We had a lot of staff, at over 450 staff in Mountjoy in my time there, and up to 800 prisoners. So it's a lot of people to have to try to keep there. And of course, you anytime you give your word on anything in the prison in particular, you see, while governments and institutions and in these rules specify that as being the number one priority, the reality is that it's not. The number one reality of prison is that prison is imposed on people as a punishment, and that's the reason why it's given. And everything else is secondary, including any type of reform or resocialization or rehabilitation, or whatever word you like to use. So the reality is that prisons are very artificial places and totally inappropriate for rehabilitation, in the sense that they're all based on punishment.
Benchmarking is a common feature in the UK prison service. Is benchmark being used in the Irish prison service?
Not to the extent that we benchmark, or in my time we're still not benchmarking in terms of marking yourself against a private enterprise, because we don't have any privatisation in Irish prisons. You have quite a lot of them across the water in England, Scotland and Wales, but we don't have them. Of course, in America, a huge part of the prison system is now privatised. In principle, in terms of getting value for money, in terms of being marketing and marked against each other, I don't have any great opposition to it. I'd have a huge problem, though, with the principle of handing out the responsibility of the state to private enterprise, because of that fact that when you take the liberty away from somebody, as prisons do, when you're sent to prison, your liberty is being taken from you by the state. on behalf of the state, I believe then that the state should be totally and directly responsible for that because of how serious a sanction it is. And I think one of my experience was, and meeting people from the English and the Scottish systems in particular, that a lot of it then was privatisation was run about making profit. And you see, where do you draw the line in terms of profit? Like in terms of food was cut to the minimum. A whole lot of support services were cut to the minimum in order to be able to compete, to be cheaper. And I'm not a very big fan of that principle when you're dealing with human beings.
Now, in relation to the privatisation of the prison service itself, how likely do you think that it's going to happen in some shape or form here in Ireland?
Personally, I would think not in the foreseeable future, because I think, first of all, our prison population is very small, 3,700 people in prison today. 97% men, 3% women. 3,700, about 700 of those are remanded in custody awaiting trial. So we only have about 3,000 sentenced people in Ireland. It's a very small number of people. And the overall budget isn't huge. So, it wouldn't be as attractive as in England, where you have between England, Scotland and Wales, 100,000 prisoners. In America, well over 2 million. So now the philosophy of governments as well. In America, with Trump, the philosophy is to humiliate people, and some people believe that's by humiliating people. So you dress men up in pink suits and all that sort of stuff. You shackle them every opportunity, that you humiliate them, and that will turn them off crime. I'm not a believer of that. I don't believe that at all. So I don't believe that you should ever set out to humiliate any human being because of the damage it does. So I don't see it happening in Ireland in the foreseeable future, but I wouldn't be surprised down the road.
I would imagine that as the Governor of Mountjoy, you encountered many of the social problems which currently exist in a modern Irish society, such as substance abuse, bullying, self-harm and violence. To what extent were you dealing with these issues on a daily basis, John?
Oh, huge. Drugs showed their nasty head in Mountjoy in 1981-82, and over the period I took over in 84 as governor, during that whole period, the whole scene was exacerbating day by day, week by week. It got to a huge level. Towards the end of my time, the vast numbers of prisoners in Mountjoy who came mainly from Dublin City had serious addiction problems, mainly heroin, but not exclusively. Bullying is a massive problem in prison because of the culture. The culture in prison is for prisoners is not to report anything. You don't brass or inform as they see it, the prisoners. It gives control to the prisoners, and so every prisoner is made very known to them that you don't ever complain about some other prisoner. For that reason, bullying is rampant, and it is a huge issue and very difficult to deal with in prison. So they were the two biggest challenges all the time, with drug addiction. Now there were great improvements made over the years in my time and even since then, with the involvement of drug counsellors, detoxification, maintenance programs, that is giving them a substitute for heroin officially within the prison. Many progressive steps have been made in that front, but it's still a huge challenge in relation to the level of addiction, the numbers of people coming into prison from the poorer areas as they represent, where they're bringing their addiction in with them. And as I said, and then a part of the drug culture, as you would expect, and as your listeners would expect, part of the drug culture is built around bullying as well. So you have the two of them, and it is, I must say, it's something that is almost an impossible task to totally eliminate.
John, in your book, The Governor, The Life and Time of the Man Who Ran Mountjoy, you refer to grappling with the politics of working in a service that was the plaything of officials. How did this manifest itself, and did it significantly hinder you as Governor in any way?
Yeah, it did, because you see, I suppose from the very beginning, and I think this is in some ways the thing that drove me on a lot. I always saw myself, from the day I was appointed as Governor of Mountjoy in 1984, as a public servant who was appointed by the government to serve the public, not to serve the political interests of anybody, including the minister. I'm afraid the reality of politics is that ministers like to be popular. They like to be seen to do things. Senior civil servants, I'm afraid, many of them go along with that because one of their top jobs is to keep the minister happy, keep the minister in a public, positive public profile position. And so often then things are done for expediency reasons, or things are exaggerated. A small little project, for instance, that would involve 10 prisoners out of 800 would be sold to the public as if every prisoner was benefiting benefiting from it. So, overcrowding as it was chronic at the time would be sold to the public as not too bad. Like, after all, one minister said, after all, they're prisoners. And so naturally, you're constantly at loggerheads, I suppose, to do the things. I always believe that the truth, the principle, an old civil servant, when I was a young guy, in the prison service 45 years ago, or 50 years ago, said to me, or said to a group of us, remember, the truth never goes away. So I always believed and tried to live to that principle, that you tell the truth, and that means telling the public. So there'll be little things done, like any sort of many little projects done to get publicity. So projects would be officially opened, and they wouldn't even be half resourced. Or they'd open something for, I remember one time there was a big public splash done, and the only thing that was actually done was a toilet was installed in relation to a drug-free unit. So you get the perception, you see, that huge amount, or the public would, that huge amount of wonderful, positive things is being done, when in actual fact the reality is almost nothing being done. That type of frustration, that type of stuff, and we were trying to introduce some progressive things in relation to health education. Sometimes that would be stopped because the public profile, the public reaction might be very popular to prisoners. Educational programs that were often very useful and meaningful were stopped because the public mightn't like them or understand them, and then political consequences would be that the minister would say they're to be stopped. So, yeah, there was times when it was very frustrating.
And finally, John, if you were given complete control over the Irish prison service today, what reforms would you introduce?
My biggest priority would be to introduce single cell occupancy for every single prisoner who would be committed to prison. At the moment, about 50% of prisoners in Irish prisons have to share cells. And for me, that is absolutely 100 years ago, and for 100 years before that, single cell occupancy, when Mountjoy was built, the principle of single cell occupancy in 1850 was introduced around that time, and that principle applied. In the 1990s, because of overcrowding, that principle was allowed to falter, and indeed government brought out a statutory bill or instrument to enable governors to double up. Today we have 50% of prisoners double up. I believe that the very subject we were talking about, bullying and drug misuse, including sexual abuse, is all facilitated by doubling up. And if you said to me what would be my biggest priority, I would say to eliminate doubling up and to ensure that every person committed to an Irish prison would be guaranteed a single cell.
Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.